thing, okay? Let's just say one thing that we can both agree on. Whether I'm a Christian, you're a Muslim, let's just say one thing that we can agree on. That the God we serve, we hope to spend one day in eternity with him. We're just passing through here, right? One thing we have in common is that we hope that one day, if we do the things that he expects us to do, that we can spend eternity with him. Call him whatever name you want to call him. It's not my name. I'm not going to be offended because if you call him by a different name, it's not going to upset me, so why should I care? Okay? Let's not get hung up on names. Why should we get hung up on a name, right? Obeying him, doing what he expects is a lot more important than getting hung up on names. So let's focus on one thing now, and that is the prophet we serve. We just don't know that the prophet we serve, we're hoping that he was inspired by God. Okay? I spent 20 plus years in a church that I was hoping that the man behind the pulpit who said he was inspired by God was indeed inspired by God. Now, he said he was inspired by God, and he was a disciple of him who was a prophet of God. He was quoting the prophet that he was telling me that he was a servant of. You may be hearing a person too who's saying that he is a servant, a prophet of the person he served, which called himself a prophet. Of who? God, right? Any other name, when we get there, we'll ask him, what do you like to be called? What's the name you favor the most? So let's not get hung up on names. One thing I want to say is the prophet that I was listening to, the prophet that I was learning from, read from a book that was inspired by him, as well as the book that you may be reading. When the person talked, he interpreted the book of the person who was inspired by the God we hope to spend with for eternity one day and do what he expects. And do what he expects, right? And the man we hope that reading from that book, we hope that he's telling us the truth. When the only one that told us the pure, unadulterated truth is the one that received it from him. Right? Let's face it. The one that heard the voice of God is the only one really we can trust that told us the truth. He heard from God directly. Your prophet, let's just say your prophet, let's just say my prophet. After all, we weren't there. But all those who read from his book, they interpret what he said. They didn't hear him personally, and they were inspired like him. right? I mean, that's for granted. The prophet, the teacher that you listen to every week, who's interpreting what the prophet you follow has received from God, guess what? We're hoping is telling us the truth, but he wasn't there. He just wasn't there. And the person that I learned from would quote Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Moses. Perhaps you heard of these prophets. One thing, though, is there were millions of people that heard of the prophet Moses personally. Pharaoh, a matter of fact, heard when God spoke to Moses, he heard what God was saying to Moses through Moses' mouth, a true prophet. And Moses would talk to Pharaoh, tell him what God told him to say, and prophesy and say, I don't know what's going on here, but you better do what God expects or this will happen. Pharaoh heard personally and experienced personally what was going to happen if he did not obey the voice of God. The prophet that you are listening to that wrote the words in the book, I hope he wrote them down. Because all we then have in it is interpretation. But the bottom line is this. I would hope that what the prophet that you learn from you want to be inspired like him. The plan that he had from God most likely isn't necessarily the plan he has for you. I don't know. Is your God, your creator, a cookie cutter God? That person that you follow went a separate way than anyone else that was hearing from God. Perhaps he heard one of the olden days prophet. He decided when to go and learn of God himself. And he went a different way. Because his way was not what any other prophet in his day was going. God had a different way for him. You get the timeline, right? You get the theme of what I'm saying. Let's just say he was inspired by God. Let's just say he did what God expected of him. Because all I heard from my church was interpretation. They didn't hear from God themselves. And I was troubled in my spirit, and I said, you know what? I want to hear from God myself. That's the example of your prophet and mine, right? He was inspired and inspired others. When you are inspired, you will inspire others. And I hope not to be like you, but inspired to go to the Father and learn of him, like the prophet you serve. He's no different than you, right? I don't want to live on interpretation, the expectations of some other man's thinking after he reads from the prophet's words or interpretations. I don't want to do what that person may say. If that prophet who we follow is blessed because he went to God himself, so do I. I want to go to God myself. Isn't that what we yearn for?